Good evening, and thank you all for being here today. I'm Charlotte DeCoster, Senior Director of Education at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. I would like to start this evening by thanking our sponsors for tonight's program, our anchor sponsor, the Summerlee Foundation, and our event sponsor, Bank of Texas. I also want to thank Candy and Ag Brown for the support of the Candy Brown Holocaust and Human Rights Educator Series, which is connected to this event tonight. We sincerely appreciate your support of the museum and our programming. I would also like to thank our program community partners, Abounding Prosperity, America's Dinner Table, Green Hill School, Jewish Federation of Greater Dallas, Legacy Senior Communities, Southwest Jewish Congress, Temple Shalom, Youth 180. I especially would like to extend a special welcome to our educators with us today participating in our Candy Brown Holocaust and Human Rights Educator Series. Thank you for your commitment to teaching our students about the past to help inform their future. We are grateful for the opportunity to be part of that journey. And finally, thank you to Natalie Walton and the State Fair of Texas for your continued partnership and for making tonight's program possible. Tonight, we are honored to present a discussion about the legacy of Dallas civil rights legend, Mrs. Juanita Craft. Ms. Craft was a true barrier breaker, becoming the first Black woman to vote in the Dallas County public election, organizing a protest of the State Fair of Texas for only admitting African Americans on Negro Achievement Day, helping integrate the University of North Texas and Dallas Independent School District, and so much more. Today we will hear about one of her groundbreaking projects, the Dallas NAACP Youth Councils. We are honored to hear from a former member of this group who are often referred to as the Craft Kids. Patricia Perez moved to Dallas in 1965 and began working with Ms. Craft and the Dallas NAACP Youth Councils shortly after. She graduated from high school in 1971 and attended North Texas State University, now UNT. In 2017, she began working with the Friends of the Juanita Craft Civil Rights House Steering Committee and later the 501c3 to renovate and reopen the Juanita Craft Civil Rights House. Our moderator tonight is Candace Thompson, board chair of the Friends of the Juanita Craft Civil Rights House and Community Philanthropy Officer for the Communities Foundation of Texas. In her role with CFT, she networks with, supports, and amplifies the work of nonprofit organizations that help communities thrive. She also sits on the board of Cultivate Community, Environmental Commission for City of Dallas, Miles of Freedom, and Seeds of Faith Collective. At the end of tonight's conversation, we will have time for questions. Please use the note cards provided at check-in to write out your questions, and our staff will come around to collect them at that time. It is now my pleasure to turn things over to Candace and Patricia.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Charlotte, for that introduction. I'm so glad to be with you this evening and that you chose to spend your time with us on a Tuesday night. And so tonight we have the pleasure of having this wonderful conversation with Ms. Perez, whom I've had the pleasure of knowing since our days of starting the steering committee before we were the Friends of Juanita Craft. And so I think that this will be a delight for all of us here, and we'll get started. You ready?
I'm ready whenever you are.
All right, good deal. And so, could you tell us a little bit about, your day one of meeting Miss Juanita Jewel Craft?
So I first met Mrs. Craft on October 2nd, 1965. My mother had to split her children up, and she sent myself and my younger brother to Dallas. Mrs. Craft and my aunt were good friends, and that was the aunt I was coming to live with. And so on the way from Love Field that day, she said, I have someone I want you to meet. And so Mrs. Craft is actually the first person I met beside my aunt in Dallas, Texas on that Saturday evening. And that Monday, because the youth council meetings were on Monday, we were in the little house at the youth council meeting. And the rest, as they say, is history. She took me on a 6-year journey that I'm still on.
Right on, right on. And so I've been asked to make this a conversation between the two of us. And I would say that my day one of learning about Ms. Craft, it was in August 22nd of 2016, when I was working at the Baylor Scott and White Health and Wellness Center at Juanita Craft. And so when you walk in, there's this beautiful mural of her, and it kind of, it gives some history, some historical details, and I'm like, who was this woman, and what was she doing, and why did I not know her sooner? But it became evident that I needed to know more of her, and so I just started doing some research and some history, but kind of keeping that to myself, because by that time Ms. Craft had been gone. She'd been gone since 1985, and so the only details that I could find were, Googling, from Wikipedia, from different history books or interviews. And then we came to be a part of the steering committee, and it kind of opened up a whole window into many other layers of Mrs. Craft. So could you describe, because Mrs. Craft lived in South Dallas, could you give us, an idea of what did South Dallas look like at that time when you arrived?
When I first arrived in South Dallas, it looked pretty different from how it looks now. It was thriving, really. A lot more black businesses. Oakland Avenue, which is now Malcolm X, was filled with businesses owned by black people. There was a lot of foot traffic. I mean, I remember as a kid, we walked all over the neighborhood selling NAACP memberships, selling candy, Ms. Craft always had us selling something to raise money to get on that bus every summer. And so it was just different. Nobody was scared to be in South Dallas. I mean, we heard the stories, but we weren't scared. We lived there. We knew that, we were safe. But it was just, there weren't so many vacant lots like there are now, boarded up houses, boarded up businesses like there are now. It was just, the community was thriving. Forest Avenue, which is now Martin Luther King, a lot of black businesses up there. We had our own bank up there, beauty schools, barber shops, of course, churches and funeral homes, little stores. It was just a different area. I went to Madison High School, which is on Martin Luther King Boulevard, which was Forest Avenue. And I walked from where I lived, which is right around the corner from Mrs. Craft, to school every day. And we never had any issues. And it's just different from when it was. And I had been out of Dallas for a long time, so coming back was really, because I didn't see the changes as they occurred. I knew it as one place when I left in 71, and when I got back here, it was just a different place.
Now, you mentioned that Ms. Craft had you all selling, candy and things to get on a bus. So could you talk a little bit more about what that experience was like, getting on the bus, and where were these buses going? What was the adventure that was had?
Well, every summer, for 3 summers of mine, we went to the NAACP national conventions. And through the year, we would sell memberships from which we would get a cut of the money from the national office. But we also had our own personal council drives, which was candy, and mostly we did candy. And then we had the NAACP at the time printed Christmas seals at Christmas, and so we sold those, and we got a cut of those. And then also there was just a lot of fundraising, which Mrs. Craft was prolific at. Let me tell you. I mean, we filled up that bus every summer with kids and chaperones. My first year, the summer of '66, which is the summer after I got here, we went to LA. And on the way to LA, she would plan these trips. And so on the way to LA, we stopped at the Painted Desert, Carlsbad Cavern, the Grand Canyon. Then we made it to LA. While in LA, we toured Watts. We saw the Watts Towers. This was after the bad riots that's happened. And I remember her telling us this is what happens when you lose your cool. And that same sign is up in the house. And then the second summer, we went to Boston, Massachusetts. And that year, the national office had put out a contest for the youth councils nationwide. Whoever sold the most memberships, adult or youth, would get a prize when they got to the convention. We won.
Right on.
And so the prize was lunch and a movie with Senator Edward M. Brooke, who at the time was the senator from Massachusetts and the first African-American senator since Reconstruction. So what 13-year-old has lunch with a senator?
Yeah.
Then on the way back, we were invited to stop in the office of our senator at the time, John Tower, and we had photo ops there. We did go through New York City on the way back. We went through Philadelphia on the way up and saw the Liberty Bell. She had these trips precision planned. It was just amazing. And then the third year, we went to Cincinnati. And after that year, I was inducted into Project Upward Bound at SMU, so I had to spend my summers on the campus at SMU. But I still worked with the Youth Council to do all the things that needed to be done.
Excellent. It sounds like you had quite a few adventures.
Many adventures, adventures that you just wouldn't dream of.
Yeah.
You just wouldn't think about standing on the Capitol stairs taking pictures, at that age, or having lunch with a senator, So, yeah, she was like Captain Kirk. She just, opened those worlds for us.
Most definitely. So I would imagine that for most of the youth, that you were all from South Dallas, having that type of exposure probably changed much of the trajectory of your lives. So could you talk about what that experience, those experiences of being able to go to those faraway places may have done, for you in your life? Because I know you ventured out, of Dallas as well.
Well, I think what it did for me is it just introduced you to many possibilities.
Most definitely.
Things that you might have thought were impossible. She made us feel really powerful during a time when people were conspiring to make us feel powerless.
Right.
And that is what was important for her.
Right. Beautiful. Excellent. Goodness. And so for you, so all the kids who were on those trips with you all, were you all known as Craft Kids at that time?
No, this came up since the steering committee. I think that's
how it came about.
We were just youth council members, kids who work with Mrs. Craft. No, that phrase was actually coined, since I've been back.
Okay.
So, but I love it. It's an honor to have that, and I'll always be one.
Yes, you will. Yes, you will. And so what would you say, what makes one a craft kid? Because we have a whole audience of people here that we're going to recruit this evening. So, but what makes one a craft kid? What are the defining traits of a craft kid?
A willingness to do service, to try to make any situation better if it needs to be made better. When we got back from the convention in '66 from LA, I had nothing to do, and nobody was having that. So Mrs. Craft suggested I do volunteer work. She was good friends with a woman named Eleanor Warner, who was the director at our neighborhood park, X-Line. And so I went up to talk to Miss Warner. Well, I had to take the Red Cross little class to do that. But I have volunteered. I've volunteered for the rest. I've always volunteer. It just was something that I really liked doing. Again, it made me feel powerful. It made me feel like I was really making situation better. Now I volunteer at the Juanita Craft Museum, and I just love what I do. So she just imbued that in us, service, serve yourself, absolutely, and serve your fellow man when you can.
Excellent. So Ms. Craft established over 182 NAACP Youth Councils over 4 states. And I'm thinking about, this is a woman whose small house was an open invitation to youth to come and to learn all types of things about civic engagement, about advocacy, about being engaged in a part of their community. What was it about Mrs. Craft that was a major draw for young people? Because she was considerably older, than the kids.
She was 63 when I met her.
Yes, so she was considerably older than the youth that she engaged, but also, this is a woman who did not have any children, but was very well known, well liked, and the fact that parents, I've known of other craft kids whose parents, allowed them to travel on the bus, the city bus, to come from other parts of Oak Cliff and everything else, to come to her home for those meetings, get back on the bus and go back home. So, but what was it about her that, that welcomed that type of energy, that, that kids knew to trust her and, and to respect her? I mean, I feel that, you had no choice but to respect her, but also with the parents trusting that it's like, she has their child's best interest at heart.
Well, I think, first of all, what you just said is we felt like she had our best interest at heart. Plus, Miss Craft was always really honest with us.
Yes.
She didn't, we were children, but we were older children mostly. My younger brother was in the youth council. He was 8, but I think he was the youngest one I ever saw there. But she was just really honest with her. And we knew, first of all, most of the kids that gravitated around her, we were kind of more civic minded, more politically minded, maybe, if you will, at that time of our lives. And just remember the era.
Right.
The civil rights era. So a lot of us just really wanted to see things change, and so we gravitated around her. We knew she cared about us. She was really honest with us, sometimes brutally honest. The first time I wore an afro to her house, she opened the door and looked at me and said, "Why would you want to look like that?" She couldn't stand afros. But she was honest with us, and
Yes.
I think that's one thing that we appreciated about her, and if she told us she was going to do something, she did that.
Okay. So how did being that, given the times, and given that she had been doing this work with the NAACP since the latter 30s and going into, to the remainder of her years, I would imagine she met quite a few people who were kind of difficult along her path. And or who did not make the path easy, for her to travel or to engage. So in 2 parts, one, how did she, deal with difficult people or people who didn't want her to achieve her goals in life in any way that you may have witnessed, and what would you say that she told you all as youth of how to continue to move forward in the face of negativity or pessimism?
Well, one of the main things, again, that she told us, if you lose your cool, they win. And that's in the house.
Right.
That's in the house.
Right.
but we never really saw her around. I know there were difficult people. I know that there were, given the times, but we never saw those. And we saw her interact with diverse groups of people, but there was never, any of that. I mean, we traveled with her to Lufkin, Longview, and Shreveport to assist her in starting Youth Council. And of course, when we went to Shreveport, we spent the night and came back the next day because we never wanted to be on the road at night. But we would leave Dallas early in the morning, get to do it, and then leave and come back, But we were never stopped. We never, thank God, and maybe that was who was looking out for us.
Right.
We never had any of those kinds of confrontations. The only time I ever saw her upset with another human being was a mother whose children was in the youth council, and Mrs. Craft had a patron who was a bail bondsman in the neighborhood, but we knew that he was doing other shady things. But he gave prolifically to the youth council, and this parent apparently thought she could complain to Mrs. Craft about that, and she was totally. By the time she left the house, she knew that she wouldn't be complaining anymore. I'll just put it like that.
Okay.
So, and because Mrs. Craft just felt like anybody who wanted to give of their time, of their money, and I mean, this man would put boxes of small cereals on the buses so we'd have stuff to eat when we'd stop at the community centers to have breakfast in the mornings after being on the road, stuff like that. And, I mean, he was doing this for this woman's kids.
Right.
And so she just wasn't really happy. But that's the only time I ever saw her unhappy with another human being directly. Now, I would watch news with her back in the day. And, of course, we'd both be sad, but, and mad at what was going on. But just on a personal level, I don't even think I remember hearing her raise her voice.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, what would you say as far as... when you think about Miss Craft, how would you describe her, to this audience, and for those who didn't have a chance to meet her, or who haven't had the chance to hear her voice?
Well, she was very elegant. She was a large woman. She was very elegant, and she would have been large even if she was small because she was just large. She was very elegant and just always just. It seemed very powerful to me, because of the things that she was doing. I mean, we were kids, but we were old enough to know that all black people couldn't do the stuff she was doing. We knew that inherently. We knew that, but we just followed along and took her cue and went on that journey, and it was just bomb.
Well, thank you for that. So what do you think it was? Because you just said that, you, and I would imagine, in that space, you, like, perhaps even in some of your own families of the kids, you realize that your families couldn't move the way that Mrs. Craft moved within the city or across the country. So what do you, and I would imagine like that, that could create some dissonance. In some spaces of like, of how of what that you're capable of in one space, and then versus, when you're back home in another space. Do you think there were ever any of those instances, or what was it that, what was the je ne sais quoi, if you want to say, that Mrs. Craft had that made her, realize that, that she. Because I think she was a woman who also knew that she moved differently in the world. So what do you think that was, that thing, if you had to, try to say what it was?
I think it's that she looked on every human being as equal. And she's talked about that. Right. We're all humans. And then she respected everybody, unless she saw a reason not to. I never saw her see a reason not to. But I think that's a lot of what it was. She looked on everybody as equal, no matter what financial bracket you're in, or what color you were, or what position you held. Right. She treated everybody with respect. I mean, that's just how, she did. And we saw that, and it kind of, because as kids, you know how kids are, they're with each other, trying to do whatever they do and stuff. We kind of thought about those actions. I'll put it like this: I did. I'm not really sure, but then I was kind of different because I was different. I was from a different place. Coming from New York to Dallas in 1965, that was like culture shock. It just really was. I mean, I went to integrated schools. I went to James Madison here, and I was integration with the Spanish last name. So, I was different anyway, and I think she saw that in me too. I think that kind of, and then she knew my aunt really well, and so I spent a lot of more time at Miss Craft's house than a lot of the other Craft kids, because when most of them were just there for meetings and stuff, I lived close, and I would go up there and can her berries with her. She grew stuff along her back fence. I would help her do her laundry, which she did by hand, and we'd hang it on the clothesline and stuff like that. And it was a way for me to get away from the environment in my aunt's house. Wasn't that great, and so it was a way for her to get me away from there. So, but I never, she just always treated my aunt like an equal, and there was, if you, from anybody else's point of view, they were not.
Gotcha.
But she treated her like that, and my aunt had great respect for her.
Most definitely. Well, it sounds like Mrs. Craft home was, I guess you can call it sanctuary, for you, but for so many other kids here in Dallas at that time. Do you feel like there were other sanctuary spaces, at that time, or that was, or how did the word about, like amongst youth spread about, hey, you going to the Craft house, or you're going to go see Miss Craft, or going in to join the NAACP?
Well, see, you have to understand, when I got here, it had already been formed. She'd already had youth councils,
Gotcha.
I think from the 50s with my English teacher. He was in her youth council and stuff like that. So it was already formed, so the word was out. And then my aunt knew Mrs. Craft and knew what she was doing with children. She donated to the cause. And so, like I said, she was the first person she took us to meet.
Gotcha.
And so the youth council was already going on when I got here.
So it sounds like it was an extracurricular club that everybody wanted to be a part of.
I wouldn't say everybody, but a lot of kids. And then she'd throw these sock hops in her backyard for us. And I mean, there were like twice the kids that would be at the youth council meetings. They'd always come around for the dances and stuff.
Your date.
So, but it was already going when I got here, and you got different reactions from kids when you told them that you were a member of the youth council. Some of them thought that was a good thing. Some of them would ask, well, how do I do it? And some of them were like, oh,
Yeah.
So, it brought about all kinds of responses. But from us, who had the privilege and the honor to be around her, we knew that we were doing something special.
Yeah.
She was special, and that we were special for having known her.
Excellent. What would you say is something that you wish that that other people knew about Mrs. Craft that's not widely shared, or that's rare? What do you think is something that that kind of gets missed from part of her narrative that gets shared out with the world?
I don't know how to answer that one. Okay. I'd have to think on that.
Okay, we'll come back. So it seems that you kind of touched on it. It seemed that Mrs. Craft knew the kids, you all, very well, and it seems as though there were unique characteristics about each child that that she engaged. One, because it was not just for it doesn't seem like it was for a short season. When you talk to you and other Craft kids, it's over a period of years, of engagement, and and keeping, and there was a door that was always open. Not that it ever, formally closed, like you turned 18 and now, I need you to go and fly. What do you think are the unique gifts, that Ms. Craft saw, in some of the youth that crossed her threshold?
So when I was in the youth council, we had a president who was really good at public speaking, and she became the president. I liked to read and write, and so we elected our officers, but she nominated me for secretary. And that second year that I was into, the officers were already in place when I first got here, but that second year, the elections of 1967, I became secretary. And then she also nominated me for state youth secretary, which I served 2 years, the Texas State NAACP Youth Councils. And then we had a guy who was good with numbers, so of course he became the treasurer, because we did handle a lot of money. We were always selling candy and stuff, and we conducted our meetings within the parliamentary procedure. And so, you had to take the minutes, read the minutes back, and stuff like that. There was a time for about 2 or 3 Christmases, we used to carol. We would walk around the streets of South Dallas caroling. And she would put the kids she knew had good voices, which did not include me, out in front to do the real singing, And so we kind of had conversations about, well, how does she know that, But and that's how we figured out, well, she was really observing us.
Yes.
She really was looking to see what she had, Like when she suggested that I do volunteer work, and she sent me to Miss Warner at the park, where I was a really active kid. I liked running around. I liked to swim. They had a really good pool at X-Line. So she sent me there. And, so she knew who we were, and wasn't, I think she might have known some of us even better than our parents did,
Well, yeah.
But then she didn't have the responsibility they have of raising us. So, and I think that's why we trusted her. She was always honest with us, and we trusted her.
Gotcha.
And she was, like you said, she was not a young woman.
Right.
I never knew her she was 63 when I met her. So I never knew her as a young woman.
Excellent. Well, because in the house, there's a photo of her, and looks like she's well into her 70s, where she's playing basketball with kids. So, I'd imagine, at 63, she was a young, spry 63.
She was. When we did the Kids Can campaign, which she jokingly called the KKK. She said that, now we have a good connotation for that organization. But anyway, she would come out into the vacant lots with us and pick up the garbage. Because the city provided those things with the spears on them that you poke stuff. She'd come right with us out there and, poke the garbage, put it in, pick up the bags, tie them up. She was very active,
Excellent. So for you, why does Mrs. Craft mean so much to you? I'm not trying to make you.
I think because she was one of a kind. And I've met many people in my life. I've never met anyone like Mrs. Craft. And I've never met anybody like her. I'm 70 years old, and I've been around. I've lived in D.C., San Francisco, New York, and Dallas. I've met many people from many walks of life. I've met people who worked in the same field as Mrs. Craft, and I've just never met anybody like her. That's why she means so much to me. Plus, because she left that house to the city of Dallas, and it needed to be opened.
For sure.
It needs to be in that community, and I just hope it becomes for that community what it was when she was alive.
Gotcha. Excellent. And so with that, so why do you think that the rest of the world needs to know Mrs. Craft?
This world, you
This-
can't figure that out.
For those who don't know,
Because we just seem to be going back in our attitudes and our politics and just in so many things that she, preached that we move forward in. A rabbi, Rabbi Olin, I saw this speech he gave about her, and he said that she was a true liberal. And what he meant by that was that, what I had said earlier, that to her, everybody deserved equality. And she was a true liberal. And I think you can be a conservative and be a liberal. You can be a liberal and be a conservative. I think liberal is not so much a political view, but a mindset, or it comes from the heart, And that's just what she was. She looked down on no one, and just everybody was equal to her. So I think that if she could be around and get as many ambassadors together as she did back in the day and send us out, that it would help, I think her voice, if she was out there with her voice like she was back in her era, in our time, I think it would help. I think people would listen to her. She just had a way of making you listen. And you, most of the time, agreed with and took to heart what she had to say.
so thank you for that. So in thinking about where we are right now, what do you think that she would have to say, to us if she were here?
I never heard her say a 4-letter word.
So that wouldn't be it.
Ever. She would just have so much to say, about what is just everything, that's just not right. Why do we need to go back? It's always a better trajectory for humans to go forward.
Right on.
So I think that's what she would just do, say the things that she was saying back in the day.
The message still applies.
Message still applies, absolutely, and maybe even more so now.
Right.
Okay.
And so my last question to you, Ms. Perez. Well, my personal.
Do I need
question.
to get a tissue?
No, you don't need to get a tissue. Maybe, I don't know. Who would you say that you are because of Mrs. Craft?
I'm educated because she pushed me when it came to me participating in Upward Bound or the Youth Council. She pushed me to participate in Upward Bound and spend that time out at the SMU campus. She pushed me to college, and I'm a really political animal. Like MSNBC is like soap operas to me, and this is just, that was from her, because she always said you have to pay attention to what they're doing, and voting, that was, we did voter registration drives when I was a kid,
Right.
That she was still collecting poll taxes when I got here, but it was 1966 when they abolished them in Texas. So I guess my sense of civic awareness, I love to read, and she loved that I loved to read.
Yes.
She encouraged me to go to the library. The library was one of my favorite places, the one right down there on Harwood. And so I think what I get from her is education and politics and volunteerism, because she's the first one who pushed me into that, and I volunteered there. I volunteered at my son's clinic in his school for several years. I volunteered for DISD. I'm volunteering at the house now, so all of that I got from her, and how to can berries.
Excellent. See, and you didn't cry.
I know.
See? Beautiful. All right. Well, and now we're going to turn over to a couple of audience questions. So if you have not already, you do have a little note card that you picked up on your way in. And so those questions will be shared, and I will read them off. And we have some questions for you.
They ain't got none for you?
Oh, no, they're not here for me. You are center stage. All right. Could you share a favorite story that you have about your time with Mrs. Craft?
Okay, yeah, I'm going to share the library story because that's like one of my favorites. So I guess it must have been the summer of 67 or 68, one of those. I got hold to a copy of Catcher in the Rye. And of course, if you've read that, you know that it's full of four-letter words. Well, my aunt had the occasion one day to thumb through it and became very unhappy with what I was reading. And when she would get to these points where she just didn't know what to do, we would consult with Mrs. Craft. So she called Mrs. Craft up, and she told me, she said, well, we're going over to Mrs. Craft later. I said, okay, because I always love going over there. So we go over there, and I'm not sure if Miss Craft was familiar with the book, but my aunt bought the book with us, of course. And Miss Craft looked at the book, and she looked at me, and Miss Craft had a way of looking at you, too, especially over those glasses. And you knew what she was thinking, and I was like shriveling. So she looked at the book again and looked at me, and she thought for a couple of minutes. And then she looked at my aunt, and she said to my aunt, she said, you may not be glad about what she reads, but just be glad that she reads.
Right on.
I could read anything I wanted after that. And believe me, I did.
Excellent. You know, and I was going to ask about the Craft House. So how do you feel that Ms. Craft would feel about the house if she were to come and visit it today?
I think she'd really like it. Yeah. I think they did just a great job on it. They just really did. The way it's laid out, the things they managed to showcase in there, her memorabilia, how they kind of go from one era of her life to the other, and they included so many things like her namesake and things like that in there. So I think she would really, and the library, of course. Yes. And so I think she'd be really happy with it. Excellent. Finally, remember.
This is almost 40 years in the making.
Thank you.
Yes, she died in 1985, and
yes,
it's taken 38 years, but we're here.
We're here.
We're here. You know, and so on that day that we had the opening of the Craft House, there was a journey you took that morning. So if you could please kind of, walk us through that journey and what memories kind of, came back to you.
So the morning of May 20th, when we opened the house, I took a lift to the house that I had lived in as a young girl. And I walked, and it's not a long walk. And I walked from there to Mrs. Craft's house that morning. And I used a tissue along the way, okay?
It's all right.
And, but I was just thinking about, how within her or from her, my life has come full circle. Yes. And it's been such a really great and full circle. Not that it's been, great all along the way. We all have our ups and downs, but many of my ups are because of her. Not just being around her, but even away from her as an adult, when I would think about things that she said, or what would she do, or what did she used to do, things like that. So that's what I thought about as I walked up to her house that morning. My feet were hurting because I had on new shoes, remember?
Yes, you did. But you look sharp.
Well, thank you.
Yes. Is there, is there a quote or a phrase, from Mrs. Craft that kind of sticks to your bones?
It's not a quote and it's not a phrase,
Okay.
but Mrs. Craft used to answer her phone with her phone number. And I still remember the phone number. It's 428-0635. And you can ask Diane, anybody who knew her, that's how she answered her phone. And so when I walked in the house, and they have her old phone there in the corner,
Yes.
and that's what instantly popped into my mind, her phone number.
Ah, goodness. And so during that time, were there any Hispanics, that were involved in the NAACP?
Me?
And some of the Medranos.
Well, they were after my time.
Okay.
Yeah, they were. They must have come, in the 70s, mid 70s or so. But when I was in it, it was just us.
Gotcha.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. And, well, there's a question here that says, how many craft kids were there? So if we had to guess at how many
Well, you have
kids
you've got-
were
you've
involved.
You've got youth councils going back to like the early 50s.
Uh-huh.
And if you, and then some stayed for many years, and some went to a few meetings and didn't come back.
Right.
So that I know in my era we averaged per meeting about 20 or 25 kids.
And at these meetings, y'all ate too, right?
No, not at the meetings, at the sock
Okay,
hops.
at the sock hops,
No, we didn't
okay.
eat at the meetings. Because in the meetings, we were in the little house.
Mm-hmm.
And so we we sat on the deep freeze, we sat on her bed, we had folding chairs. And so, no, we didn't eat. But we ate at the sock hops. But, and then there were kids on the buses with us who weren't necessarily in the youth councils, but she would accept the cost of the trip from their parents to take them. So there were a few like that who didn't necessarily work in the youth council, but their parents wanted them to experience those trips. So she charged them,
Okay. Hey.
We earned our way,
Yes, of course.
but these parents had, money. Their
Right.
parents we had another youth council member who was a city council member, Leo Cheney.
Uh-huh.
And his twin sisters were on the bus with me, and they didn't necessarily work like everybody else did in the youth council, but they were on the bus because their parents could pay for them to be on the bus.
Hey
So.
now. So were you directly involved with any kind of sit-ins or protests with Mrs. Craft? I know you spoke of the Kids Can campaign, but any others?
Like carrying signs and stuff. No, by the time I got here, there wasn't a whole lot of that. We did do voter registration drives and stuff like that, but I never carried a sign. I never did the walk-in ones. Mostly because the state fair was desegregated that next year in '66, and then North Texas had opened its doors.
Right.
And H.L. Green had been desegregated. Most of that had been
Passed before you got here.
before I got here.
Gotcha. So going back to the story about the afros. So, was it a style preference, or what did it, did you feel that it looked too radical? Because I also know that in a previous conversation you had mentioned to me that Mrs. Craft believed, that we're supposed to dress up.
Well, first let me tell you how I came by having the afro. And this is the good story.
Oh, this is the story.
It's kind of sad. So April 4th of 1968, the night Dr. King was
Yes.
killed, I was sitting in the Graham Beauty School on Martin Luther King, Forest Avenue at the time, where I could get my hair shampooed, pressed, and curled for 50 cents. Yeah, it was 50 cents.
We
I
can't
know.
do that now, y'all.
No, you can't. So they had the radio on, and it came over the thing that Dr. King had gotten shot.
Yes.
So everybody started moaning. And then it came on that he had gotten killed, and so everybody was just... So, talk about where you are when things happen. So then they just closed down the beauty school. And when I got home, I noticed like half of my hair was in its natural state and the other half had been pressed. So I'm 15, and I know Dr. King had been killed, but I still had to go to school the next day. And could I go to school looking like this? And so how I came by the afro, I said, okay, the only thing I can do is just wash my whole head of hair. So I washed it, and the next day I had this big old afro. And so that's when, a couple of days later, that was a Thursday. Dr. King got killed on a Thursday. It was a Thursday night. And so that Saturday, I was going over there to help her do stuff. And I thought I was proud of the afro because my classmates and stuff, they thought it was kind of cool. And I opened the door, talk about bursting the bubble. That's when she said to me, why would you want to look like that? You know, but a lot of us adapted afros in the late 60s and stuff. I finally pressed mine out just because I like to go back and forth. But she felt like that about that. She felt like that because I think Miss Craft kind of thought that that would make people treat us differently. You know, and maybe at first it did, you know. But like I say, I didn't really keep it, but she did not like them. She also did not like to be called black. They had a whole write-up in, I think it was the Morning News or something, about how she did not want to be called black. She said shoes are black. So.
Color. All right, so that is all the questions that we have time for this evening. Thank you, Ms. Patricia Perez, for your time.
Just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us tonight for this amazing conversation. I want to thank especially Candace and Patricia for joining us and sharing your stories. We really appreciate it. I also want to say a big thank you for the educators who spend a whole day with us, and I'm sure are pretty tired after all of the amazing conversations we had. So thank you for coming, and I wish you... Yes, of course.
Is it on? Yeah. So I just wanted everybody here to know that the Juanita Craft Civil Rights House and Museum is now open for the public. It is open Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 5. You can go online at the South Dallas Cultural Center and book yourself a tour, or we have been known to do drive-by tours. Just come on over. We have a resident there, Miss Kendall Ferguson is there. She's the resident director of the house, and then I'm there as a volunteer. I'm there Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Please come by and support this effort. And bring your students, bring your families, bring your friends. Come on out and see what we're doing. Thanks.
Well, now that we have plugs, just a moment. We also have the Friends of Juanita Craft, or anyone who would like to get engaged and involved with us. And you can check us out at the website of friendsofjuanitacraft.org. And in collaboration with the State Fair of Texas, we have the upcoming Humanitarian Awards, the Juanita Craft Humanitarian Awards. So all you educators, I know you have students that you have worked with in your classrooms who are under the age of 18. We're looking for, that's called our Spark Award. So if you have some students who are civically engaged and civically minded and who are doing great work, we would love to elevate them and to honor them. And then if you know of any young adults who are under the age of 40 who are doing that work, and then we go on to the visionaries. You don't have to be under 40, you can be over 40. And for those who are visionary and leading change in the community, and then those who are our legacies, because our goal is to elevate and amplify legacies throughout. And this is not just for Dallas, but this is a nationwide thing, but we also we know that here in the city of Dallas, there are a lot of great work and a lot of people who are doing great things. Thank you.
Well, they stole all my plugs now, so I have one more, though, for our amazing friends at the State Fair of always supporting us, and our folks at Region 10 and 11, but especially for the State Fair. If you have not gone to their Juanita Craft curriculum on their website, too, it's really amazing. I even make my little 8-year-olds go through some of it, too, and look and read some of that stuff together, so go look on that. It's actually, if you scroll down beyond the Humanitarian Awards, which I really recommend too, you'll find that there as well. So thank everybody for making this an amazing and very inspiring evening. Have a great evening.